how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lucas Chung. I am an interaction designer. I work with a lot of emerging technology, but I have a background in architecture and spatial design, and seeing ways in which I could use those professional practices to enhance my contributions to the Baha'i community has always been something that's really exciting to me. And so this calendar, which kind of sits in that intersection, brings in another passion of mine, which is the understanding of time and space. I'd say it really sort of showed up on my map when we switched the way that we I think our relationship, the relationship of the Badi calendar to the sort of standard Gregorian, Christian-based calendar. And I think that was in 2015, which was when, the holy days became sort of kind of fixed in a particular way. And Nowruz sort of got kind of decoupled. And to me, that was a really fascinating thing. And so, I can just tell you, so I've been a Baha'i my entire life. My parents were Baha'is, so I'm second generation. And I remember growing up that the sort of keeping track of feast felt a little bit, just tenuous. Being able to make sure that I think I felt that it was challenging to keep 19 days as sort of like a time interval in my head. That framework felt a little bit sort of incongruous to everything else that we were seeing around us. We have months that have 30 days in them, or 31 days. And then we have weeks that have 7 days. And neither of those have a clear relationship with 19 days. And so I remember thinking, okay, 19 days is kind of 3 weeks, but it's not quite. And so when you think about it from the term of 3 weeks, you're always kind of, on the wrong foot. And so when the House sort of made these the House of Justice, when they made the Badi calendar guidelines very clear, it made me feel like I needed to really start to address this and think about this and take a more proactive role in understanding what does time mean, and what are some of the assumptions, or what is the framework that we live our lives in, and whether that framework should be questioned. Should we start to push back on that? And if we were to, and then for me, it became more about how do we allow the Badi calendar to be our primary form of measuring time that comes before the Gregorian calendar. And from that re-evaluation came a series of, potential, ways that I started to think about this calendar. And so the first calendar I actually designed was actually a poster. And it has a grid of all 365 or 66 days in the year. But it was aligned in a 19 by 19 sort of array. So you have 19 columns representing the months, and you had 19 rows representing the days. And so already that sort of kind of made me think about it differently. But in the process of designing that calendar, I understood that it allowed me to understand that the Gregorian calendar, or the standard calendar that everybody uses, itself is an abstraction, and that it carries with it assumptions and ways in which it kind of filters our world and the way we think about time, which I think was, I learned so much about how it works, and I understood that calendar itself was a development of a previous calendar which did that even or less accurately. And so there was innovation in the standard calendar that I think is really important to acknowledge. The idea of a leap year. I can't remember who came up with it, but it was some monk somewhere who said, okay, we can have a leap year every 4 years, except when there's a zero at the end of the year, then we can skip it. But then if there's two zeros at the end of the year, we bring it back. And I was like, that's really fascinating. Um, we don't need that
Right.
anymore. And so we have ways of measuring, the celestial bodies that allows us to have even more accurate ideas of when we should have a quote unquote leap year. You know, we have our own version of it, and when we should ignore it. And so sometimes a Yamaha, the the intercalary days for the Baha'i calendar, has
Right.
5 days, and then some years it has 4 days. But it's challenging to understand what that system is, but we don't need to do that math
Right.
anymore. The math that was presented was a way to allow people who weren't getting their information from a centralized
Right.
source to do the calculation themselves. And so learning that made me realize, oh, the body calendar is not a just a different version of our calendar, of the standard calendar. It's a wholly new
Right.
thing, and we've completely decoupled it from the standard calendar that everybody uses. And I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you, I also grew up in a Baha'i family, and I learned that song with the months of the in the Baha'i year, and then I knew that each day in the month had those same names, and I was like, okay, I've got it, figured it out. And really, it's only now that I'm realizing, no, like everything in the Baha'i revelation, time has been completely redefined. Like, even if you look at when the day starts with the setting of the sun. I can't, I struggle to wrap my mind, like, even fasting. You're fasting, the sun sets, you eat your meal, and you're like, okay, it's the end of the day. You're like, actually, it's the beginning. This is the beginning of the next day.
Yeah, sunset to sunset. And so that actually was kind of the impetus to move from a poster design to something that is digital. On a poster, you can't make that
Right.
distinction. It's like you kind of are just sort of like most of the day aligns with this other day. But there was always a nagging part of me that was like, that isn't quite right. And I want to like, and even in the process of designing the poster, it was challenging because I was like, okay, well, for example, the the twin holy days, the births of Baha'u'llah and the Bab, are based off of a semi-lunar
Right.
calendar. But if the I can't if the is it the new moon or the full moon? I can't remember. But if that phase of the moon happens after
Right.
sunset, then it really is the next day of the standard calendar. But if it happens before sunset, it's the previous day
Right.
of the calendar. And understanding that relationship is really delicate because no one who's providing lunar phases is providing that
Right.
information. That's you have to take a bunch of information and then cross-reference. You take the lunar calendar, and you have to cross-reference a sunset timetable for Tehran and understand, is this before or after sunset? And so, already it's like, it's another way in which the Baha'i calendar is its own unique thing. And so that was like the first thing I
Mm.
had the first idea I had when I made this app. I was like, okay, we need to make sure that the date ticks forward, the Baha'i date ticks forward at
Right.
sunset, and that the Gregorian date stays the same.
Right.
And from a computational standpoint, that actually was a lot more complicated to implement because all of the information that this my calendar app uses is based off of publicly
Right.
available standard calendar information. And so even this is still a little bit of a jerry rig, but it works.
Well, I know, like, even the calendar that, like, the pocket calendar that the US Publishing Trust puts out, it's got like the grid with the Gregorian calendar. And then the Baha'i days are kind of, I don't know what shape that is, trapezoidal, so that it slightly covers part of one calendar day and goes into the next so that it can cover this distinction of, yeah, sunset to sunset.
Yeah, and so I think this was a first take. I'm thinking about ways that I can improve it. There's a good chunk of people who are using it right now, and I'm getting comments from them. But yeah, I definitely think like there's a few features I'd like to add. I'm thinking about how we could integrate some of that lunar
Right.
information. I think that I had that on the poster. I actually included that, and I got comments from people saying like, "Oh, this is really
Mm.
helpful," for various reasons. And I think my background is in. I used to be an architect. I always think about how do we increase the information
Right.
density here? How do we make this really useful at a glance without
Right.
overwhelming? And so that sort of describes my thinking behind some of the I have like these little progress meters through it. One of them is like shows which month you're in. One of them shows which day of the month, which is like sort of a
Right.
circular array of dots. And then I have that arc that kind of travels around, and it gets close to completion at sunset, and then at completion it sort of
Mm.
resets. So also as a visual learner, like those things actually convey more to me than
Right.
just raw numbers. I get a feel for where we are in the fast. It even kind of harkens back to childhood when we used to make paper chains to
Right.
kind of communicate that. And that's the inspiration. Is it's like, okay, so we have like three more days left in the fast. We have 6 more days left in the fast, and sort of watching that tick down, it helps to enhance that sense of accomplishment. To be like, this is the part of the fast that I really enjoy because I know that I've sort of gotten my routine down, or this is the part of the fast that I really struggle
Right.
with, and I need to find that extra ounce of energy to sort of get me through the
Right.
day.
I,
And I also want to encourage people to continue to use it after the
right.
fast. This isn't a fast only thing. It's going to continue to persist. And the, the color combinations of the background are based off of the month and day. And so those will continue to change throughout the year. Every day gets a unique combination of colors. So
Well, visually, it's absolutely striking. I have to say, just from an
thank you.
aesthetic point of view, it's beautiful, and I feel like it captures some of this beauty that's in this unique way of charting time. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is just the concept that everything is based on a spiritual quality, right? So we have these spiritual qualities that are not only the days of the week and the days within the month
Mhm.
and the months of the year, but also the years themselves in these cycles of
Yeah.
19. And I'm just curious what your reflections are. It's like less numerical and more of a quality. And what does that mean for how we, yeah, for how we document time and how we look at the day in which we are living?
I think that sort of mystical element is so important. And you don't get it when you look sometimes at I'm always thinking about those 30-day calendars we used to, or like the regular, it was a Gregorian calendar, but then like the Baha'i, all the Baha'i dates were like written in small letters at the bottom. I always felt like that was a bit of a betrayal. I don't want to speak ill of anybody else's hard work, but to me, as a Baha'i, I would look at that and be like, we can do better, or we can get these, or we can highlight
Right.
this, and with a digital platform, an app, you have the choice to see both. You could see the Arabic and you could see the English. And so getting those spiritual qualities in front of you so that you're reading them and understanding that was really important. It's impossible to understand or appreciate what those spiritual qualities
Right.
are if you don't if you don't have them in front of you, if you aren't learning it, because that we don't all learn the songs. We don't, I mean, we should, but we don't. And that was another sort of impetus for me to get involved in this. It was like, I don't remember what the name of the month
Right.
is all the time. And so being able to get it at a glance was so important to me. So
Yeah, and it just makes me think that it's going to make for some interesting combinations because there's some of the qualities that are repeated, like Jalal, which is easy for me to
mhm.
remember. It's a day of the week and a day in the month and a month. You're like, there will be a time when you're like, yeah, today is the Jalal of the Jalal of the Jalal. And what does that mean? And yeah, how is it going to change our outlook? Like when you're talking about visually looking at that circle and seeing where you are, how is it going to change our community life when we're like, okay, now we're entering the month of questions. Now we're entering, how is that going to frame how we go about community life and individual life? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know either. But we can't figure it out until we actually see
Right.
it or learn it, And it's exciting to me to to put this out there. I mean, I'm always thinking about like how to what are interventions in our everyday life that are going to have an impact, and you don't know what little thing you might change that could have a huge impact in the long
Right.
run. And I'm not going to be so presumptuous to say that my little contribution here is going to have a major impact, but at the very least, being able to provide people with that
Right.
information, I think, is at least a little service I can provide. So, and the reception has been really positive. I'm really happy that people have found some utility in it. And I hope to increase that utility moving forward, seeing how I can improve it. I don't want to just, the thing about the posters is you design it and then you kind of have to walk away
Right.
from it for a year. And so this one can live on, and there can be changes, and I'm gonna see if what I can do to improve it.
Well, it's really cool. It's yeah, it's beautiful, but it's also it like you say, it's a tool. It's a way to kind of reframe your thinking. That's all the questions I kind of had. Those were my burning questions. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that I haven't necessarily asked?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what is exciting about it is, in some ways, it feels like it kind of it really made me think deeply about time, and I've sort of struggled to figure out how to convey what I'm talking about, especially to people who are maybe not sort of engrossed in it as much. This relationship with, like, as Baha'is, we have a number of things that happen that are based off of these sort of celestial bodies. You know, understanding when to say your noonday
Right.
prayer, understanding when the day starts and begins. Fasting, sunrise to sunset, and but then it goes deeper because it's like, oh, Naruz is a specific moment of alignment between the sun and the
Right.
earth. And it made me realize it's like a lot of what we have or what we take for granted as standard, bears no relationship, or it has a loose
Right.
one. January 1st is not a special day. And it's, in some ways, it sort of is trying to be more about the winter solstice. There was supposed to be some alignment there, but based off of things that have happened in history, that day has gotten
Right.
pushed. And and then what that sort of illustrates to me is that this physical world itself is an abstraction. It's like an abstraction of the spiritual
Right.
world. And so being able to have that perspective, and see how that idea permeates everything from, time to our lived reality, I think it's really powerful. And something as simple as understanding what time it is or what day of the year it is can suddenly have a profound impact on how we live our
Right.
lives.
Yeah, for sure. And also just, when you think about passages in the writings that talk about the swiftness of this life and how it's really the twinkling
Mm-hmm.
of an eye, and then there's that often quoted sentence of Abdul Baha about when there is love, there is always time. So time is
Yeah.
expansive and infinite. And if we think about the things in this world, all the good things in this world, there being a reflection of it in the next, then that also makes you think about time in terms of the spiritual worlds of God, not just how we
Yeah.
chart it here on this little planet, but in our spiritual lives.
Oh man, yeah, that last hour before sunset during the fast, it feels like there's so much love.
This is so much love and a lot of stomach grumbling going on.
Yeah,
But it's true. I have to say, like,
but
I'm aware of the past, like where the sun is in the sky during the fast, and then I kind of forget. Once the fast is over, I'm not really looking at the sun anymore.
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's I think it's great. I try to keep that
Mhm.
alive for the whole year, and and it can be challenging when especially when we do things like daylight savings
Right.
time and we're moving our clocks around. It's like, and I look to my kids. I have two sons, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they don't. The 7-year-old is slowly starting to rely on clocks and watches, and but but the 4-year-old has no concept of time. For him, it's morning, and deep inside of all of us is this sense of time that is based off of the sun. Our circadian rhythms are based off of how much light we're
Right.
receiving, even when our eyes are closed. And so to me, my 4-year-old son, in a certain sense, has a better sense of time than
Mm.
any of us. We've distorted that, or we lose that sense when we start to rely on these abstractions like our clocks and our watches and stuff. But in reality, our bodies respond to the light. It responds to that, the warmth on our skin. And I'm always trying to figure out, how do we access that? As a designer, I'm always thinking, how do I access that kind of innate experience of something that we're doing, something that we're, the space that we're in, or our sense of time. And because I think that's really healthy. I think that is the way that well, we've evolved, and that's the way that the Baha'i faith seems to confirm it in a sense with the way that it treats time.
Mm.
And then also to respond to something else you said, about the fleeting nature of this life. What's not present in the calendar app that I made is an understanding of the cycles of
Right.
years that exist, and like the coulishes and all of the these like groupings of like just like what can amount to
Right.
centuries. I being having an understanding of that, I think, and a way of measuring it, instead of just like, oh, this is 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, the way that we talk about it, it's so abstract. These numbers are huge, but when you start to give names to things, then you have a deeper understanding of how it works, and you have a deeper understanding of what that scale of time
Right.
is. I think that that is one feature I want to figure out how to integrate. It's not something you have to think of every single time you open the app, but it should be something that is available
Right.
to understand when you do.
Right. And Holly Hansen wrote an article in the latest Baha'i World volume about the implementation of the Badi calendar. And she talks about how these 19 years will, could come to define an individual's life, right? Like those first 19 years are really your childhood and your adolescence. And then the second is, I guess, early middle age, like adulthood. And then you have the second
Yeah.
part of adulthood. And then you kind of, moving into your twilight years. But she suggests that perhaps we'll come to relate to one another depending on which 19-year cycle you were born in. Like right now we talk about millennials and all of this, but it'll perhaps come, in in which Vahid were you born in?
No, that's a. I think that's fascinating. 19 years is, it's a versatile number. I've heard people describe generations as 20
Right.
years, and other people be like, 20 seems too long, and maybe it's like 15, and I don't know, maybe there's something to it, but it's like 38 doesn't seem magical in our base 10 way of thinking
Right.
about numbers, but from a base 19, maybe 38 is the real start of middle aged life. Um, so I'm on the other side of that right now. So
Yeah, and it's just it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And she also talks about, maybe if whatever year you were born in that 19-year cycle, you'll have a special relationship to people who were born in that same year in the next 19 cycle. There'll be some kind of connection because it was both the year of like the year of answer or the year of affection.
that's really cool. Yeah, I'm not as well versed of the at the year names, But I know that people have been talking about the year of
Yeah.
answers a lot. So I'm like, okay, let's see what answers we're going to
Right.
get. Because sometimes you don't like them.
Well, that's true. But then I've also been thinking, the
Yeah.
fast is also a time of questions and answers too. So it's not just this
Yeah.
coming year to think about answers. I think it's there in every daily moment of meditation and prayer.
No, these cycles exist, and they're deep, and they exist at different scales, and just even seeing how they can frame our intentionality, I think is really exciting.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for making some time in your